LGBTQ refers to sexual identity, but sexuality is only one way we identify ourselves. In our Defining Fairness series, WFPL is looking at how LGBTQ identity intersects with other issues, like race, religion, and economic status. Today we'll meet Walter W. Walker II, a Louisvillian since 1986. Walter spoke with WFPL's Philip M. Bailey and Laura Ellis. Here's how he describes himself.
Honestly, I would say I'm Walter. Now, in the technicality terms, I do consider myself, an African American, a Christian, a Presbyterian, and also a gay man. Being African American, you're going to experience the African American experience. Being gay, you're going to experience the gay experience. So when I was younger, before I did come out, I was living in those boxes. So as I matured, as I got older, as I got comfortable with myself and started loving myself for who I am and me being the unique person that I am, I've kind of stepped away from those categories. And that's the reason why I say I'm just Walter.
I'm not sure if it's something that is particular to the African American community, but there seems to be this great burden with people who are still in the closet, so to speak. Even in 2012, it seems that there's this heavy, heavy burden that you carry even when other people don't carry it. Where does that come from?
It's the stigma of being gay. And especially it's a double whammy because here you are as an African American and being gay. You do have, the African American religious community on this side coming and attacking you. Then on this side, you have African American culture coming and attacking you. Because in black culture, I think that we view being homosexual as a negativity. Look at hip hop culture. Hip hop culture looks down on homosexuality, and that's the reason why I believe that you have a lot of these people who are in the closet because it's that stigma.
But there's also this weird sort of thing that goes on, and not to get too inside baseball for listeners, but there is also this thing in the African American community where gay members, LGBT members of the community are quintessential in the African American churches.
It's right. It's
it's not a secret either. It's sort of an open secret.
Right.
But, and not just in choir directors and the stereotype, but fundamentally in hair salons and you see openly gay members of the community everywhere.
Right.
Who are accepted as a part of the community, and yet those sort of spaces are still left for more feminine performing members of the LGBT community. It seems that there's more of a stigma and problem for being a quote-unquote masculine performing man and to come out and being gay. Is that the difference there? I
think there is a difference. But then you think about what is masculinity anyway? It's something that we define by characteristics, behaviors, and actions. I like to watch sports. I like to drink beer. I like to do the guy things. But at the same time, I'll admit, I loved Guiding Light when it was on the air. So I used to watch it every day. What is masculinity? It's just something that we as a society define on what's acceptable about what guys do, what's acceptable for what girls do. This is what I tell people. Because, you have people in the religious community that say being gay is a choice. I didn't ask God when I was born on an application, do I want to be gay? Check yes, no. And I think that's the reason why I went to severe depression was because I didn't want to be gay. And if I had a choice now, I don't want to be gay. But this is just how I am. This is what I've known. This is what feels natural for me.
So we know in society there are certain harmful sexual stereotypes about African American people. Have you, seen those kinds of stereotypes play out in the gay community? And is it different?
No. There are certain stereotypes about being a black gay man. One is being hypersexual and oversexed. I had so many guys, older white men, who will come to me, hey there, black stud, blah, 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 blah. I had one guy came up to me, he approached me, and he says, hey, good looking, how are you doing? And I'm like, oh, hey, how are you doing? Thanks for the compliment. How can I get to know you? And I'm like, well, I wasn't interested. And so he's like, oh, you want money? I lost it on him. Completely lost it. And I told him, I said, here, let me tell you something, friend. I said, I have a bachelor's with 2 specialties. I have a master's, and I just graduated #1 in my class for master's, and I probably make more money than you do. So don't you sit up there and tell me that, hey, good look, you want money. No, do you want money?
When Diane Moten lost her job at a daycare center because she was gay, she got involved in the early days of the Fairness Campaign and became part of the city's history. But it wasn't without personal cost. She tells WFPL's Philip M. Bailey and Laura Ellis how her activism caused a rift with her family.
To be honest with you, I don't know if I even have any family left here. I probably do, but I think if they were to probably pass me on the street, they wouldn't even acknowledge me. They'd probably cross the street, and that's fine. I mean, it took me a lot of years to finally kind of accept that, we're never going to agree about this.
Do you seek reconciliation with them at all now, or if that opportunity presented itself, would it be worth it?
Ooh. I don't think so. I just think we are just so estranged, and we are so different. We are so different from one another. It's just personal for me, it'd be really hard.
We talked a little bit about your own story with your employment issue that is what got you rolling in your activism. Would you mind just telling us that story?
Not at all. I was working at a daycare center, and it was wonderful. I had my own kids, and so I knew what my routine would be every day and who my kids would be. And it really just did start from a conversation with some of the other ladies up in the break room during lunch. They'd talk about what they did over the weekend and their husbands or boyfriends. And one of the girls asked me, she said, well, you never talk about that. I'm like, well, I don't go to bars. I work and I go home and I go to church kind of thing. And it was just, she said, oh, okay, I was just wondering. And then, I don't know, I just went on about my business working, and a few weeks after that, and she said, okay, I have another question. I'm like, okay. She said, this is just a sense I get. She said, I think, do you like girls? I'm like, yeah. And she said, okay. She said, okay, I thought so. So I don't know if there's something I said or did that she figured it out, and I thought, I'm not going to lie about it if I'm asked. So, and then it was like she asked me that. I will never forget. It was on a Monday. And then Wednesday, next thing you know, I'm being called into the office saying there was an incident that happened with a child, and it was like Monday afternoon at lunchtime. And I'm like, I had no clue about what they were talking about. Well, we have to investigate this. And then like a week later, they are like, we just don't feel like we can trust you around children any longer. And that was on a Wednesday. And they had the security guard walk me back to my room. I wasn't allowed to say anything to my children. I needed to get what I had and leave. And walking down the street and ran into a friend from church, and she said, what are you doing? And I just fell and just started crying, and thought I wasn't going to cry. And it was I don't know, probably the most heartbreaking thing of my life. And I don't regret to this day that when she asked me that question, I would have not answered it any differently. And that's why I am as out as I am, because, I'm never ever going to hide who I am.
Members of the LGBTQ community often experience rejection from the churches they grew up in, and Maurice Bojangles Blanchard was no exception. He's one of the co-chairs of Faith Leaders for Fairness, part of the Fairness Campaign. He also leads the True Colors Ministry at Highland Baptist Church. He tells WFPL's Philip Bailey and Laura Ellis that LGBTQ Louisvillians can't necessarily expect to be free from harassment or even assault when out in public, and they can't always rely on the police for help.
One of my past relationships, we were eating at a restaurant here in the Louisville area, and began being harassed by patrons, some men at the restaurant. Requested the restaurant manager come out, and instead of coming out, they simply asked us, had a waiter come out and said, did you want to move? And at this point, we'd already started eating our meal, and we we said we shouldn't have to move. So the manager still didn't come out. And the threats from these individuals, these patrons, began to get louder and more threatening. So we called, or I called 911, and the police came. And by that time, 25 minutes later, the patrons had left, and I was left to explain to the police what had taken place. And they seemed, and not all police, I'm not trying to blanket this, but the individuals who responded to my call were very oblivious to what we've been through. Asked us if we hadn't been maybe so obvious about our relationship, we wouldn't have experienced this. And it was not the first time, so I wasn't shocked by it. But after so many times, you begin to grow or have so much animosity, not only for folks who treat you that way, but then for police who we pay our taxes for them to protect us. And instead, we're judged and condemned by them as well. And so you're left to manage this rage, and it's very difficult at times. And I think we see all kinds of examples of folk in society who act out on that rage, and then we point our fingers at them. But we never see what has taken place in the background that has produced that kind of response. So it is, and I don't feel comfortable today holding the hand of my husband anywhere in Louisville for fear of being attacked. And you say, well, you can prosecute. Yeah, but that's if I live. I've been attacked in 1997, almost killed. There's no guarantee you're going to make it through it. So resting on a law that's in the statutes to protect us, that's very vague and unsatisfactory for someone who wants to be safe.
You mentioned spending a lot of time in church as you grew up. I'm wondering, how did your family of origin react to your sexuality?
I'm not hesitating because I'm trying to figure out a nice way to put it, but I think my story may be unique, and I'm very blessed for that. I was outed. So I didn't choose to come out at the time I was outed. I was actually in Memphis, Tennessee. I was on my way to New Orleans, and my mother left a message on my cell phone. That was back when the cell phones were pretty large. So that thing beeped and you knew it. And I called her back. I was there in Memphis, and she asked me, somebody had sent them a letter, my parents a letter, and she asked me about it, and I was truthful with her. But at the same time, I was terrified. My father's an ordained Baptist minister. My mother grew up in church. My family's just super religious. So I knew very well what coming out would do. And it took some time. There was some anger. There was some hurt on both sides. But I've been very fortunate in that my parents have not only embraced who I am, but embraced my husband, embraced my ministry and my calling. And my father actually told me that I've helped him grow more spiritually in the last years of my coming out than he had been in his entire life after going to seminary and getting his doctorate in ministry. And that's not a tribute to me. That's a tribute to my father and a tribute to all those religious folk who extend themselves beyond bigotry and start trusting a faith of inclusion. So I am extremely, extremely lucky. And ends up my father married my husband and I. So people just fall out on the floor when they hear that. They say, a Baptist minister? Yeah, and he's my dad. What? So it's a great starting place for discussing inclusive faith.
Tiff Gonzalez is a fourth-generation Mexican-American native to Texas who identifies as queer, both in gender identity and sexual orientation. Tiff talked to WFPL's Philip M. Bailey and Laura Ellis about being Latino in a city where conversations about race don't usually go beyond black and white.
By and large, when Louisvillians talk about race, they talk about white and black. That's what the discussion is here. Certainly, the Latino population here in Louisville is growing with new immigrants. But oftentimes, when I often chuckle when I read in the media how it's written about here in Louisville, white, black, and immigrant persons. And I think, wow, well, where do I fit into that? Because I'm not an immigrant. I don't hold that identity. So on the whole, there is some invisibility. And then when we bring that down to a smaller community of the queer community here in Louisville, it's my feeling that it almost largely gets erased. And it's something that I have struggled with in the 5.5 years that I've been here.
People often do talk about Louisville. Louisville is predominantly white, but it's also the wealth in Louisville is also very, very, very top heavy. On a personal level, do you find that a bit disheartening to not really find someone who you can identify with on multiple different identity formats?
Yeah, I mean, it's markedly different from the place. Like I said, I'm a proud Texan, and from the Houston area. I try not to focus on that all the time, but there definitely have been moments in my time here in this city to say, what am I doing here? I could go to New York or go to Chicago or go to California, right, and would be met with other people who would understand my experiences and then also be able to hold similar identities to mine. And it would feel better, right? I mean, that's at least the conversation that happens in my mind. I think the other part that happens, at least when I think about my activism work in this community, when folks have racial or class privilege, especially when we're talking about within the queer community, they are able to dictate what issues the quote-unquote community cares about, what we get to talk about. So we talk about things like marriage equality. We talk about things like who has the right to serve in the armed forces. So what about folks who are transgender or genderqueer, gender nonconforming? And then also people of color, or they're poor. When you add all of those layers on top of each other, do we talk about folks' opportunities to live safely, healthy lives in the community?
Is marriage equality more of a status issue than a welfare issue?
See, this is the part where the brown queer person talks about how, for me personally, marriage equality is not tops on my list. And it's not that it's not important, but I do think it is about the high level of focus on it will allow some people who already have racial and class privilege then to be able to attain one more level of privilege in this society, often to the neglect of some other very important issues facing queer people, like some of us can't get jobs or keep a job. Some of us are getting beat out in the street and can't maintain safety in our homes or, in the neighborhoods in which we live, can't maintain healthy lives or access to health care, don't have the right to vote and be able to say, this is how I want the city or the state or the country in which I live to be governed.
Ball culture is an underground LGBTQ subculture whose participants perform at events known as balls, similar to fashion shows. Jason Gardner was one of the founders of Louisville's ballroom scene and a member of the Fairness Campaign. He talked to WFPL's Philip M. Bailey and Laura Ellis about the scene and how much of our popular culture and lingo were born in the black gay community.
Most folks would be unfamiliar with what I call black gay lingo, black gay vernacular, although it is very, very much present in popular culture. So Beyonce in her songs has Snap for the Kids, or Work, or Take a Seat, or Get Your Life, throwing shade. There's many, many examples in popular culture and kind of general conversation that incorporates black gay lingo. I'm not quite sure where it grew out of, other than to say that much of it comes from the house ball community, which started primarily in the 70s and 80s in New York City, which was black and Latino, primarily gay men and trans women who come together and have something called balls, which are akin to fashion shows, akin to talent shows. And these folks get together different places in Harlem and created their own kind of community. And from that community grew a lingo.
And does that go on here in Louisville?
I actually was one of the founders. Me and several of my friends founded the Kentucky version of the ballroom scene back in the early 2000s. And now that scene has flourished to include several hundred people. There are balls every month. Folks come from New York City, Atlanta, all over the country come to participate in our local ballroom scene. So that's something I'm very, very proud of.
How many, and you've described houses, what is a house and how many do we have here in Louisville as far as black gay ballroom culture is concerned?
So to describe a house is similar to how the hippies had families. Like black folks, we all have god cousins, play mamas, a church auntie. So it's very, very similar to that situation where this is a chosen family. I'm known as a father. I have many, quote, gay kids. And so these are people who have chosen me and look up to me for different reasons. I have information to share about what it means to grow up in the LGBT community. I have knowledge to share. So you have mothers and fathers, which are primarily older, more experienced, more well-known members of the community. You have kids in the house. You have aunties and uncles. And so houses are just gay chosen families to look out for one another. You certainly have the ball aspect where I help my kids prepare for a ball. I teach them about the ballroom scene. But beyond that, it also means that if you have nowhere to go for Thanksgiving, you can come to my house. Or if you want to go get tested for HIV, I'll go with you. We probably have the better of a dozen or so houses in Louisville.
Some folks I've run into have often said fairness is a white thing. What are the issues facing African-American LGBT residents, whether political or social?
Well, yeah, and to that note, fairness is an ordinance that protects from employment discrimination, housing discrimination, public accommodation discrimination, when oftentimes a lot of black gay people just can't get a job, period. If you're a black trans woman, what does it matter to you that you can't get fired for being LGBT when you can't get a job to begin with? Or what does it mean that you can't be denied an apartment because you're LGBT when you can't afford an apartment to begin with? And so to that end, yes, issues that affect folks on a day-to-day, more imminent basis, for example, HIV prevention, for example, especially for the trans population, access to jobs, quality jobs. There is no gathering place. There are no organizations that bring us together outside of nightclubs and pageants and balls to talk about our issues and help us to come to some kind of self-realizations.
Is it, at the end of the day, race is still the defining issue when you first meet someone, because that's the first thing you see?
It absolutely is. Much in the same way that I'm perceived a certain way because of my gender presentation. So I understand that if I walk into a group of women, they don't know if I'm a feminist. They don't know if I'm sexist. They don't know if I love women or if I hate women. So in the same regards, when I walk into a space, I'm seen as black. And whatever that conjures up in your mind is going to dictate how you interact with me. So yeah, at the end of the day, for black people, the color of our skin is the predominant factor. And the sad part about it is that you have black folks in our community who somehow think that they are different from the rest of us. They went to better schools. They went to better neighborhoods. They speak better than us. Their diction is better. They don't do the things we do. They don't eat the foods that we eat. And somehow they're different. And I remember when I faced the situation with Woody's nightclub several years ago, where the bar owner went on a racial tirade against me and called me the N-word and banned me from his nightclub. I remember there were black folks who said, well, you guys must have been doing something wrong. You guys must have been causing some kind of trouble. And there was one guy in particular who said that to me when that situation first went down. And you know what? But this owner's always been a great person towards me. And then I remember several months later, that same person came back to me and said, you know what? I was in that nightclub 2 nights ago, and the owner lost his mind on me and called me the N-word. And I didn't realize at the time. So there are a lot of black folks who don't realize, no matter where you live, no matter how you self-identify, the fact of the matter is you're black. And at the end of the day, that's all you are to a lot of people.
Amanda Stahl says she uses the word queer because it breaks down people's perceptions of both sexual orientation and ability or disability. She spoke with WFPL's Philip M. Bailey and Laura Ellis about having a body that doesn't perform the way society thinks bodies should.
I think of it as I have the big D and the small d. The small d is my medical condition, and that's my cerebral palsy. But my big D is my disability. It's my being a part of that disability culture. It's more like I'm taking pride in my disability. That's the difference. So I don't really talk about my small d very much because I think it's irrelevant. I think disabilities are socially constructed just like race and all the other isms that we talk about are very much socially constructed because our bodies don't fit into what society thinks they should fit into. And so, like, and I think that's what is very interesting to me, because I've been working more with the trans community, and they have very similar experiences of having their bodies have to fit into what society tells them to fit into.
Why does that make people so uncomfortable?
Why does it make people uncomfortable? I wish I knew, so I could, like, change the world and, like, change people's minds. Because I think one of the reasons it would be that, is because I think it's the way that our culture is, because we have this culture of, like, youth and of independence and disability and trans identity and queerness in itself. It kind of just breaks all that up and like challenges the whole idea of the body and the whole idea of relationships with people and things like that. I think that's what scares people.
I've heard people who are blind say, don't try to fix me. I don't need to see. I don't see it as a disability in the first place. I am deaf. I don't want to hear. I'm fine with the way I am. Is that sort of the same thing?
Yeah, I always say, people ask me all the time if there was a pill, would I take it? And would I be able, if I could take it, would I, and I wouldn't be able to walk? I say no, because I wouldn't be the person that I am today without it, without not being able to walk. And plus, I would feel a lot of guilt for being able to walk. I don't know. But I love who I am, and I like being in my wheelchair. I was born with cerebral palsy. I was born this way, and they gave me, my doctor gave me the label of cerebral palsy. So this is all I know, and so it would be really weird to wake up one day and be able to walk. I don't know what I would do with myself. It would be really strange. Oh my goodness.
So, we hear a lot and read a lot about race as a social construct, gender as a social construct. You're the first person that I've ever heard say disability is a social construct. Mm-hmm. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that. And I'm just guessing what you mean is if we didn't have this idea of the default human being, then there would be no such thing as somebody who's different than that.
Yeah. And the actual word that we use is ableism. I love going to the grocery store, because the grocery store is the only, how people have grocery carts and they go around in their grocery carts and the door automatically opens, right? So you and your grocery cart can get out on your own, and no other place has that. My disability is not noticed as much in a grocery store because I don't have to ask anybody to open the door. The main disability to me is people's attitudes towards bodies and the architecture that we live in that is made for an able-bodied person. So say if like every grocery store didn't have those doors that opened, so everybody would have to have somebody open the door for them. So it's pretty much that same thing with people with disabilities.
WFPL's Defining Fairness series looks at how being LGBTQ intersects with other aspects of identity. For more information, visit WFPL.org and search Defining Fairness.